Apologies for the technical challenges, such as life in the Zoom era, I think. We'll get started. I know some people are still logging on, but we'll get people in here and going as quick as we can. So everyone, welcome to today's briefing. I'm Jennifer Caddick, Alliance for the Great Lakes Vice President of Communications and Engagement. I'll be moderating this briefing. And this briefing is discussing Illinois House Bill 1616. This bill would allow a proposed chemical recycling plant near Joliet, Illinois, to bypass Illinois Environmental Protection Agency permitting and review processes. Our speakers will discuss their opposition to HB 1616 and the environmental and health risks of this proposed plant. Two quick housekeeping notes. One, all attendees will be on mute for the duration of the comments. We have 3 speakers that I'll introduce in just a minute. We'll then open up the session for questions, and I'll give directions on how to ask a question when we reach that point. Additionally, we are recording this briefing. We have 3 speakers today. They are Jennifer Walling, Illinois Environmental Council Executive Director, Dr. Anya Brandon, Ocean Conservancy's Associate Director of U.S. Plastics Policy, and Andrea Densham, Alliance for the Great Lakes Senior Strategic Advisor. I will note we're going to be swapping cameras with Anya and Andrea, so just keep a lookout. Anya's got the Ocean Conservancy logo on her shirt there. We're going to start off with Dr. Anya Brandon, as I mentioned, who is Ocean Conservancy's Associate Director of U.S. Plastics Policy. She's going to help us better understand chemical recycling and the broader issues with this technology. Dr. Brandon has a PhD in environmental engineering from Stanford University, where she studied novel ways of breaking down plastics. Prior to joining Ocean Conservancy, she served in the office of U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley as the lead policy advisor on issues including plastics, oceans, and water. In the past few years, she has been a co-author on multiple state and national level bills regulating plastics and plastic pollution. Anya, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all for bearing with us. The technical challenges this morning. I'm just confirming everyone can hear me? Awesome. Well, I think to start us off today, it's important to know what we are doing right now to understand what mechanical recycling is versus chemical recycling. So right now in the United States, when we talk about recycling, we're talking about mechanical recycling, which is the act of sorting, collecting, sorting, grinding up our materials, and then returning them back into pellets, flakes, or other products that can be reused in our circular economy in a circular fashion. This has been the method of recycling for decades. And while there's no hiding the fact that our recycling system isn't working as well as we need to, especially for plastics in comparison to other materials, we know that this chemical recycling is not the answer to this issue. The problem really is that materials are not made to be recyclable in the first place. So nearly 70% of the most commonly collected items in Ocean Conservancy's International Coastal Cleanup Day are not recyclable in the first place, meaning there was no way for those materials to get into and stay in the circular economy, even if our recycling system was working as well as we want it to. We know at the same time that industry is desperate for a way to clear its name of the plastic pollution issue that we're facing in our ocean, our environment, and in our communities. And they still want to make as much plastic as humanly possible. So to do that, they're proposing what's called chemical recycling. And so let's quickly talk about what that is. If there's one thing you leave today with, it is that chemical recycling is not recycling. It does not recover plastics, and it's incredibly harmful to communities and our environment. Chemical recycling is a broad term that encompasses a variety of technologies, including pyrolysis, which is the issue at play here in Illinois. Pyrolysis uses extreme heat and pressure to break down the chemical bonds in a plastic, taking it from a polymer that we know down into essentially an oil. So taking plastic back to fuel or back to oil. This means that this technology, again, is essentially plastic to fuel as opposed to real recycling. These in recycling technologies, these chemical recycling technologies, in essence, then lock us into needing more virgin plastic to replace the plastic that they are in essence burning and turning into oil. So for the most part, states have regulated recycling as solid waste management and this type of chemical recycling as incineration as hazardous solid waste management. It requires environmental reviews and permits to make sure that the hazards that we know are associated with these types of technologies are not impacting our communities. But right now, industry is lobbying for the reclassification of many of these technologies as manufacturing rather than as solid waste management to skirt environmental oversight and permitting. And that's essentially what they're doing here in Illinois, as we'll hear about in a second with HB 1616. Before I turn it over, I don't want to leave you all with no hope. We do know what we need to do to address our recycling and our plastic pollution crisis. We have proven policy tools to address this challenge without the need for these harmful plastic to fuel technologies. We need to start by first and foremost banning the most problematic and non-recyclable items in our waste stream. Things like expanded polystyrene, which I know is coming down the pike here in Illinois, hopefully later this week. We also know to truly address this challenge, we need to look upstream. We need to make less single-use plastics in the first place and require the plastics that we do use to actually be recyclable. That can be done through a variety of mechanisms, including holding producers responsible for their wasteful products, which again gets at the core of this issue as opposed to a quick fix or silver bullet that industry is trying to push with chemical recycling. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Jen, and we can hear a little bit more about 1616.
Thanks, Anya. I just want to clarify, it does say a different name on the screen, but once again, that was Dr. Anya Brandon from the Ocean Conservancy. And now we'll turn it over to Jennifer Walling, who is the Illinois Illinois Environmental Council Executive Director. And for those listening in, I will drop a link in the chat with some more information, bios about each of our speakers. Jen?
Great, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for attending and talking about this issue today. Plastics and recycling and disposal of plastics has been a hot topic among legislators. It's something that I get the most concern from constituents, the most concerns from lawmakers about. And this bill is bringing the issue of plastic pyrolysis or gasification to the forefront again. This is a bill that was passed in 2019. It was something that we were not excited about at all at the time in 2019. But it was moved from an entire state bill to a bill that covered just a couple of counties. And now they are asking for an extension to be able to permit this facility. The bill itself would grant a permit to a pyrolysis or gasification facility as a pilot project. We don't quite know in terms of IEPA was not there at the hearing. They haven't answered questions about what that permit would look like, but it does mean that they would get a permit, so they won't have to go through the normal permitting process for a facility that has hazardous waste, that has lots of emissions, both air, could be water, like we said, hazardous waste emissions, both coming in and out. And it is taking in municipal solid waste in the form of plastics. So this is a facility that really always has been a concern. And in the years since that bill passed, this bill is no longer a pilot project. This type of facility, there are 8 of them at least throughout the country, depending on what portion of the facility is performing that. But there are a number of these facilities that are performing this technology already all over the United States. We know that they are polluting facilities. We know what they do. This is no longer a pilot project. And now they would like to build this facility. The bill allows it in Will or Grundy County. We don't know exactly where they want to put this facility or which company will do it, but there are a number of facilities that are out there that want to do it. And in the meantime, between 2019 and 2023, I've also been approached by a number of local folks that are really concerned about this going into their area. Citizens Against Ruining the Environment is a local organization that's highly opposed to this. They're very concerned about air emissions in this area that already has some environmental justice areas. And it is really concerning. And in addition to this being something that skirts environmental laws to put this really toxic facility in place, this has been something that industry and manufacturing proponents have brought forward as a reason that we shouldn't do anything about our waste, that our curbside recycling programs are fine, that we don't need to reduce plastic waste despite the litter that we see everywhere, because they are looking to this plant to become viable, to take plastics and convert it into fuel for burning. So this is something that we highly oppose. We do not want to see the state legislature move forward in the Illinois House. And also when it gets to the Senate, we'd love to see the governor veto it. This bill is a huge concern and a huge toxic risk. This plant could go forward without this bill. They would just need to follow normal environmental laws like other industrial users. And I think it shows a huge amount that they're not willing to go through that normal environmental process, because it demonstrates how toxic this facility might be for Illinois. I'm happy to take questions at the end, but I think I'm passing it over to Jennifer to introduce Andrea.
Thanks, Jen. Our next speaker is Andrea Densham. Andrea is a senior strategic advisor to the Alliance for the Great Lakes. Andrea, I'll turn over to you.
Thanks so much. Thanks to both Jen and Dr. Brandon for giving really important context. I want to talk a little bit about how this risk impacts not only Illinois, but the Great Lakes region. The burden that has happened in the Great Lakes is really a disproportionate impact to our region. So our region is home both to, and so is Illinois, both to oil refinery, toxic chemical production, and polystyrene production, as well as other plastic production. We just this January, and just to highlight some of the concerns and grow off of what Jen was just talking about. In January, there was a fire that started in an Illinois chemical plant. It sent a massive plume of smoke over the city of LaSalle. That factory produced industrial chemicals, including phosphorus, polymers, and other chemicals. It is those kind of concerns that really highlight why we want to ensure that this is going through proper EPA permitting, but also we're just concerned about the technology itself alone. And in a recent analysis, a team of researchers at institutions, including the University of Washington, was recently published by The Guardian, highlighted that the Great Lakes region alone had 4 out of 10 of the worst hotspots for fine particulate air pollution. And 3 of those are in Illinois. We are holding a disproportionate harm of the production across the United States. And that has been true not just now, but over years. One of the great works that the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative has done is to clean up old area concerns from past industrial pollution. We don't need to make or produce any additional industrial pollution. We can move towards sustainable, smart solutions. Anya talked a little bit about reuse. We can build smart and impactful recycling systems, and we can ensure that producers are packaging materials in materials that not only can be recycled, but be composted or to move towards reuse again. This is a time where the last thing we need is to increase the burden on rural and low-income communities across our region. So at a time where we're seeing the impacts of unregulated industries producing more toxic pollution, resulting in harm in local communities, the last thing we need is this paralysis and gasification to increase the harm of toxification and toxic emissions. So we are really encouraging everyone to think about moving in a different direction and making sure that HB 1616 does not move forward this year. The last thing I just want to say is, and this is just to reiterate what Dr. Brandon said, is that the good news is that by investing in recycling, reducing single-use plastic, moving towards reuse, and building a strong and effective recycling programs, we can ensure that the kind of toxic pollution that potentially could be emitted from this facility doesn't, and instead that we build sustainable future here in Illinois and across the Great Lakes region. We have the potential to do this. This is the time to invest in sustainability. And with that, I'm going to end and can join my friends in answering any questions that you might have.
Thanks so much, Jen, Andrea, and Anya. For members of the media on the line, if you have questions, you can either raise your hand, use the raise your hand function, or just drop me a note in the chat and I can unmute you. Okay, we'll start with Steve Tolikin. Steve, if you could start off just by identifying the media outlet that you're speaking with, that would be great. Thanks.
Sure.
You
Hey,
should
hi.
be. Oh,
Can
go
you hear
ahead.
me?
Yep.
Okay. Steve Tolikin, I'm with Plastics News. Thanks for organizing the event and taking the call. I know. Can you identify, or can you try to identify more the company that's involved here? I mean, are we talking about a permit for one pilot plant in these two counties? Are we talking about multiple pilot plants potentially? I mean, obviously ExxonMobil has refineries in Joliet. ExxonMobil has said publicly they are evaluating Joliet for a chemical recycling facility. So can you identify, like, is this really an ExxonMobil specific piece of legislation? And can you talk about the size of the operation that would be permitted under this? You talk about it as a pilot plant. So what would be, how big of an operation would be permitted?
Yeah.
So thank you.
If I can start to address this, and then Andrea and Anya can take the rest of it. I mean, part of it is we are not positive, and there is a lot of manufacturing in the area that could add this on. Like you talked about ExxonMobil. There's also an INEOS plant in Shanahan that has been doing chemical recycling that some of the locals have heard some items about. We've also heard testimony as part of the foam foodware ban legislation, House Bill 2376, that a quarter of the styrofoam in all of the United States is produced in that area. And so there are a number of facilities that could do this. The bill itself doesn't limit the number of facilities. It says will in Grundy County. It also, to our perspective, doesn't limit things like other chemical recycling facilities bring in tons and tons and tons of hazardous waste as part of the process, both a valid part of the process, but also to deal with hazardous waste from other companies that become the fuel, that become part of the process itself. So we're not positive, but there are a number of areas that this could be added onto. And I've just mentioned a few possible companies, but we don't know exactly which company wants to do this. And it is not limited to one pilot project. It just needs to have a permit in. This extends the permit from 2025 to 2027. So you just need to have your permit in before 2027 to do this. It's really lacking in detail. And Anya or Andrea might want to take more.
Yeah, I would just add, and we don't know the specifics. Both ExxonMobil and INEOS have publicly talked about building out chemical recycling here, especially using, for INEOS, using Agilex-based technology, which is the same technology we see in Tigard, Oregon. There have been great studies looking and detailing the amount of dioxins and other toxics coming out of that facility, and where those toxins end up getting shipped around the country and to other countries. So we know the impacts of that type of technology because it's been around, sadly, for a while here in Oregon. And so we can really learn from Oregon's mistakes there.
Last thing I'll note is just the disproportionate burden, again, that we in Illinois seem to be holding on our shoulders. With the potential for additional toxic waste that's produced in other spaces, as well as an unlimited opportunity for facilities within these counties. The counties themselves and that area is already experiencing quite a bit of toxic and air pollutants. It's why that we see some really significant challenges in terms of health disparities and health challenges. The last thing we need is more of that, and especially since we have good solutions that are sustainable and don't cause the same kind of harm. We're really discouraging and really hoping for a vote no on HB 1616.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Next up, we have Jordan Woolman. Jordan, you should be able to come off mute.
Hi, thanks all for doing this. I really appreciate this. I have a couple questions, but I will limit myself and just ask, maybe this is best for Jen, but anyone can chime in here. Like, Illinois, speaking like politically speaking, is one of the few quote unquote blue states to have this type of law on the books. Can you just explain, how did this happen? Like, did Illinois lawmakers pass this before chemical recycling became uncool, quote unquote, before industry began its big push? And can you speak to the challenges here politically in the legislature of getting out of chemical recycling once the state has already gotten in, so to speak, even though there's no plant yet, the law is on the books that it could happen.
Yeah, I think that in 2019, there wasn't a lot of interest or awareness that we were sensing from talking to our member organizations about this facility. And when it was first proposed in 2019, it was for the entire state of Illinois. So it would have been anywhere, anytime, any pilot that could have gotten a permit. And so it was taken down to Will and Grundy County. I knew from the perspective of the committee in the House and the Senate, we didn't have the votes to be able to kill this particular bill. This is something that is being brought forward by somebody who tends to be pretty moderate and a labor leader and has a lot of support from labor in general as a lawmaker. Just a lot of respect for him on the issues that he cares about. But this is something that's going to be really problematic. We didn't have the ability to beat it at the time. I'm hoping that this is something that we now can fight against. And I also wasn't expecting, I think there was some concern whether it ever will be able to be built because, I think in Illinois, we have a really terrible history of incineration. We have had incineration laws that were subsidized by taxpayers through our energy bills that we got rid of. And so we have that really terrible history. And I think this is going to be a facility that's pretty expensive. And in the meantime, since 2019, every time that I've wanted to try to remove plastics from the waste stream, there's been attacks from the manufacturers and waste industry about how this new technology is coming and we don't need to do anything about reducing plastics because we can burn it through this type of fuel. So I think it is definitely a change in power of the state legislature in terms of priorities of environmental issues, but also just awareness from everybody. This is not like 4 years ago, this probably badly could be considered a pilot project and one of the first in the country. Of the 8 big ones that I've seen, very few were in place in 2019. They were maybe permitted and heading there. So things have changed a lot since that happened. And this is just not a facility that we should welcome to Illinois.
I would just add that, this isn't a blue state or a red state issue. This is an education issue and an understanding issue. Our state policymakers and really, down to the municipal level have been feeling the burden of plastic waste in our waste stream and the inability to do anything about it. They're hearing from their constituents. We're hearing from our members time and time again about the challenges with plastic recycling and just being fed up with the sheer volume of plastic in our waste stream and the inability to avoid it. And so I think everyone's a little desperate for solutions. And these types of technologies at the very surface level sound appealing. And as soon as you peel back the curtain, you realize these are not solutions. These are not recycling. These are really harmful. But when you are in desperate need of doing something to tackle this really systemic issue, it can be appealing. And so we know what we need to do to fix this issue. We need to hold producers responsible. We need to make less single-use plastics in the first place. And we're seeing states across the country, taking those very actions, California, Oregon, Maine, Colorado, not all the bluest of blue states, right? So we've seen that this is not necessarily a red state versus blue state issue. This is really about making sure that our policymakers understand the challenges and the harm of this technology and that there's alternatives to taking action.
And one last thing I'll say is that, you know, our Great Lakes region has been the industrial hub of our country. We've been the engine that has built the things for years. We can build things that we have a hard time dealing with at the end, like plastics, or we can build sustainable things. We can come up with smart, sustainable solutions. And now's the time for us to make that switch. Unfortunately, we've been the place that has had the burden of the toxic production, both the production and then the end of life. So we're both, and that means our citizens, and especially in rural and Black and Latino communities, have been living with that burden, right? And when it comes to plastic pollution, our rural communities and those small municipalities have had to deal with what to do with what has been produced by global industry. We can fix that. Is absolutely fixable. And so if we move towards holding producers responsible, reduce the amount of plastic waste, and produce things that are made in sustainable ways, we can not have to have any kind of, we can really reduce the kind of toxic manufacturing or having to deal with the toxic waste that we are dealing with now.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you.
I just will note, I do see also questions in the Q&A. So I think Bob Okan was up next, and then I'll switch back and forth between the Q&A questions and folks who have their hands raised. So Bob, if you could state your name and your publication, you should be able to speak.
So I am Bob Okan with the Herald News in Joliet. The mayor of Joliet last month announced a unspecified plan to create a car recycling plant at the former U.S. Steel Mill site in Joliet, which would include plastic recycling. Would such an operation involve the type of facility you're talking about?
You know, that's really hard to tell. I mean, it could, although if it's a car recycling facility, that doesn't say to me, because this is, you know, car recycling, you would see metal shredding, you would see you need a large, even outdoor space to be a part of car recycling. You could add this on, but it would be, you know, this is a highly chemical done in a lab. It's not like done outside, it's done in a warehouse, it's in a lab. I don't know that would be as compatible, and probably the volume of plastics. I mean, they are looking for municipal solid waste plastic to go into this, not necessarily industrial plastic waste. So I will also leave it to Anya to answer some of those questions. But, you know, I mean, this is a big commitment that takes a lot of money. And I don't know that like an add-on to a different facility of that type would work, but it could be an add-on to some of the existing pollution sources that are in the area.
Yeah, Jen, I think you hit the nail on the head. These types of facilities are being opened and tried across the country to deal with our, you know, municipal recycling challenges. 40% of plastic production annually goes to essentially single-use packaging, and that is the same type of single-use packaging that we cannot currently recycle because it's not made to be recyclable in the first place. So that is the type of product that is in our curbside recycling, contaminating the system there, that they are looking to fix. And so that is the issue they're trying to challenge. Durables are, you know, like car recycling is a very different waste stream and a different set of issues, and just makes up a significantly smaller proportion of the waste stream we're talking about when it comes to this type of issue.
Okay. Can you tell me though, you say there's a proposed, is there any specific facility proposed with a location just not identified, or has there been no facility proposed, just that you know to go somewhere in these two counties?
I mean, there hasn't been an announcement related to this bill that's made. I do think that there is somebody that knows what facility this is and where it'll be and what they'd like to do and what investment has already been made, but they don't discuss this when they bring it to Springfield to talk about what is planned. I do think somebody knows, but it hasn't been announced to the public. And then I think, you know, this leads me to, you know, Michael Hawthorne asking the question, can you explain about how this bill is different from existing law? In that same vein, the bill says that a pilot project allowing for a pyrolysis or gasification facility in accordance with this section is permitted for a locally zoned and approved site. So, this is it. It allows the agency to adopt rules, which I will say in 4 years, the agency still has not adopted rules. This is a bill that will give this site a permit. I have questions about what that means entirely and what they'll have to go through. I'm sure they need to meet US EPA requirements to get the permit, but it says they'll get the permit. So there's no denial. There's no, we don't want this here. It is, they will get a permit for this. And I do think, I don't know, I'll pass this back to Jennifer to keep moderating, but I'm happy to answer any of these other discharge questions.
I think I'll say one
Go ahead,
quick
Andrea.
thing, and I think it's really important what Jen was just saying there. I mean, it's basically a blank check to create as many and whatever type of facilities in this region. It's a real significant problem that they are trying to have the General Assembly say, you have a permit without going through normal processes. And why is that the case, right? That's the question that we need to understand more, is why aren't they willing to go through normal Illinois EPA processes in order to move forward with this? It makes me quite concerned if there with that much opacity, without that much. We need more light, we need more transparency to understand what's moving forward.
Thanks. I also just want to follow up with one other question from Michael Hawthorne. I'm assuming, Anya and Andrea and Jen, that we could send along some studies and reports after this. Okay, Michael will follow up with you on that after this briefing is over later today. Let's see. We'll go to Megan Quinn. Megan, I will take you off mute, and if you could state your name and the publication you're representing.
Hi, thanks. This is Megan Quinn. I'm with Waste Dive. Can you hear me okay? Great. So I was hoping you could give, you've mentioned the 2019 law a few times. Can you give a little bit more detail and background about sort of like why it got kind of cut down to just these 2 counties, and also if there's been any impact since that time? It sounds like there's kind of just been a lot of waiting, and I'm just hoping you can give me a little more information about sort of what happened with that 2019 bill and sort of any impacts it might have currently. Thanks.
Yeah, I think in 2019, we were coming out of a time period where and then there's a bit where you have to understand, we came out of the Rauner administration. We came out of a time period where the General Assembly wasn't as aware or interested in environmental issues. And in 2019, when I looked at the committee, I didn't even have the votes to kill the bill in committee with respect to the people who were on it and the Republicans who would be voting for it. The negative votes just weren't there, and we did some work educating about this. I know I personally testified on this at least twice, and especially with the bill that was introduced was much, much broader. I testified about, especially about Illinois' previous incineration laws and how those needed to be subsidized, how I thought that for a facility like this to exist, they were going to eventually need subsidies. In Illinois, the original bill had some pollution control facility exemptions as well. So we just didn't have the votes to be able to move it forward. People didn't know what it was. I think there was a lot of concern, but there wasn't the ability to really educate folks in a way that we were able to not let this move forward. So, with the sponsor's interest, he just really wanted to support one facility in his district. And the previous bill would have allowed it anywhere. And so I do think that was the compromise in 2019, was to just do it once. But they are bringing this forward, trying to extend the time period, saying that it's because of COVID. I mean, they've already had 4 years. They have another 2 to put this permit in the ground as written. There's also a bill to repeal this section entirely that Senator Ventura and Representative Jennifer Gon-Gershowitz have that hasn't been called. But I think that we really are past that, and we need to consider where this project should go through normal permitting hoops to move forward. And I think IEPA should be taking a look at this. In the 4 years since this bill passed and IEPA was given the authority to write rules on a pyrolysis regasification facility, they have not. And that's a huge concern because when we see new waste technologies, for example, there's new food scrap anaerobic digestion facilities, IEPA doesn't necessarily know how to respond quickly and the permits can take longer. And in this case, this may be an expedited permit because they just need to give it. And so I think, especially with these new technologies, we do need to make sure IEPA has all of its ducks in a row, that they take their time, they do it right. They look at all possible aspects that might be a problem to the community. We're looking at significant environmental justice legislation. Is this going to go in an environmental justice area? Do we have to do a cumulative impact analysis? That's a question that we don't know the answer to based on this bill and what it might do to the state.
I will just say this is not new in terms of these types of delays for these facilities. There's been great investigative journalism out there and other reports. These facilities are incredibly capital intensive, incredibly expensive, and the vast majority of them that have been planned have been delayed or not set up to are operating at under capacity if they're operating at all. That's because the economics are not there. They do not yield plastics, so you cannot get a return on your investment in terms of plastics recycling. These facilities are locking us into infrastructure that is essentially designed to be wasteful, to take waste and make it back into fuel while generating new virgin plastic. This is not a new issue in terms of like wanting extensions, needing additional money, needing additional support. Because of that, they're asking for this extension for a permit, which they could do anytime by going through the normal process. So they don't need this special exemption. They don't need any of this, they don't need legislation to give a blank check to go build a facility, especially when we don't know who they're giving that blank check to.
Two additional things. One, we currently have a bill in front of the General Assembly to ban polystyrene. Polystyrene use is reducing not only in the United States with additional bans. It's been banned in Canada, it is, and in many other countries across the world. The use is decreasing. Everyone knows it's the worst of the worst. We need to ban it here in Illinois. So some of the materials that they think will be an input into a system like this are actually beginning to disappear. I mean, we know the DART facilities in Illinois make a number of sustainable products in addition to their polystyrene, and we would just love them to increase that part of their portfolio and eliminate their polystyrene side. Last thing I just want to note that Jen Walling was talking about, the important for us to invest in state-based EPAs. We need them to have enough staffing, to have the capacity as new technology comes on, for them to be able to address and protect the people of our states, the state of Illinois and across the Great Lakes Basin. We saw a gutting of them in former administrations. We need them to be robust, healthy, and have well-funded staff that are experts that can deal with these new and upcoming technologies.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Megan. We'll go next to the question in the Q&A from Megan Smalley. Jen, maybe you could take this one. I'll read it in case everybody can't see it. It says, so is the reason for HB 1616 just to get this facility up and running in Joliet? Second, if the bill does not pass, are the pyrolysis plants still able to construct, just that they cannot be labeled as manufacturing? And finally, is there a timeline on the bill that you know of?
So yes, this is to expediting the permit process for facility that could be in Will or Grundy County. That's what the bill says. If the bill doesn't pass, the date until 2025 will still exist. And so they still will have this subsidy until 2025. They want it to move until 2027. After 2025, it expires. It does have a portion in it, as you mentioned, that has a piece about making it a manufacturing facility and not a waste facility. I don't quite know how the IEPA will interpret that, because it does have a part to the extent allowed by federal law. that are the products that have been processed are further processed by such facility and returned to the economic mainstream are considered recycled and not subject to regulation as waste. So that's the end product. But there's not a portion in this. I was surprised, for example, this isn't skirting certain pollution control facility rules. There's other portions that it's not skirting. I wonder if they even did a full look at any of the laws, and I wonder how IEPA is going to interpret it and what portions IEPA is going to say that they can not do, because it does say not permitted. IEPA didn't offer testimony, I believe, in 2019 or this year on what pieces they would not consider. So they do have to put a permit in by 2025 right now if they want this to go forward under whatever this pathway is. That leaves a lot of confusion. And so but I do think that even under existing laws, this could be built in Illinois. It just would have to follow normal environmental laws, which, you know, if it's going into Joliet, that's a non-attainment area. So that might be something that it's more difficult to get a clean air permit. We're going to pass EJ laws. They might need to do cumulative impact analysis. There's a question about effluent discharge, and it is quite possible that there will be effluent discharge. They will have to get all these permits. There's no way to be exempt from them under federal law. So they will need to get an NPDES permit, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, if they are putting something into the river. And they could be turned down if it exceeds the TMDL, the total maximum daily loads for that particular river. But we don't know. We don't know what they're going to discharge. We don't know what the hazardous waste is going to look like. Most certainly, there will be lots of hazardous waste at the facility that both are maybe disposed there and converted to something, and that result from the product. So we don't fully know the permitting process that's going to have to be followed. This does leave a lot of questions, even with the existing law passed in 2019.
Okay, we'll go next to Marissa. Let's see, you should be off mute and able to ask your question. If you could identify your outlet, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Marissa Heffernan with Resource Recycling News. And my question is, it's something that you've all touched on a little bit here, but how does this intersect with the EPR law that's currently kind of kicking around in the legislature?
Great question. I'm happy to kick us off and then turn it back over to my colleagues. This is on a parallel track to that law, and it's trying to go on an accelerated track, right? They want this bill to pass as soon as humanly possible, before there's scrutiny, and before we get the answers to these questions. Jen can probably better speak to where it is in the process right now, and so I'll let her do that in a second. I think importantly, facilities like this make it harder to do and build effective extended producer responsibility programs, because if you have if you have these types of recycling facilities in your state that artificially inflate your recycling rates and give you credit for burning plastic and making virgin plastic, we're never going to achieve real extended producer responsibility. So it's really important that we make sure that we, set up an EPR program for success with strong definitions, strong rates, strong targets that would exclude these types of harmful chemical recycling technologies. But right now they're trying to move this as quickly as possible to, get in before anything like that could be set up to really deal with the systems issues we have in Illinois.
And we have seen requests both from the packaging extended producer responsibility. We've seen requests in paint and carpet law to include chemical recycling as part of the recycling rate. The original draft of the extended producer responsibility law that was introduced did include a study on advanced recycling that would include chemical recycling. And we are highly opposed. It's an item that we brought to the proponents of the bill and the other stakeholders to say, no way, this pyrolysis and gasification is not recycling. This is disposal, it's incineration. It is not recycling, it's not reuse, it's not good for the environment.
Thanks, Marissa. I do just want to acknowledge Jen Walling did sort of address this, but there is a question in the Q&A from Juan Pablo asking if these kinds of facilities require any kind of effluent discharge. Is there any risk to the Illinois River, for example? I didn't know, Jen, if you wanted to add more to that, or if Anya or Andrea had anything to add.
I think, Anya, are you aware? I mean, I know there possibly could be effluent discharge, but I'm not aware of what other facilities have asked for.
Yeah, the main emission risks from these types of facilities, because you are essentially burning plastics, are air emissions. And so we're looking at surrounding communities and neighborhood impacts, both from the act of operating this facility and then from what is coming out and how they use what's coming out. So this really, really crude pyrolysis oil that then gets burned and used as fuel has a really, really high known risk, especially for carcinogenic risk. So there was a great article that reviewed EPA's own data on the use of this pyrolysis oil and found that, I think it was 1 in 4 members of local communities that were, exposed, which is an EPA definition of what exposed means, could develop a lifetime risk of cancer. And so that is astronomically high. That is 1/4 of the people in neighborhood facilities who could develop a cancer risk over their lifetime from this type of exposure. So those are the risks that we know about and are motivated to prevent right now. The effluent risks into our rivers, our ocean, our other water bodies I'm sure are there. They're just less, they're less studied because we know how much the air emissions, it's easier to track and we know more about that. That's where the data is right now.
And to reference back what Jen was talking about in terms of our environmental justice bill, the accumulate harm that is happening as there are more densely located, co-located factories and manufacturing, that each one of those plants could produce on its own highly dangerous and produce really bad health impacts. But when you accumulate that together with a co-location of other plants and facilities, that just increases substantially. And that's a really big concern for many of the rural areas and Black and Hispanic communities across our state.
I do see one additional question in the Q&A, again from Steve Tolikin. The question says, for those of us not in Illinois, is the sponsor of HB 1616 an influential member in leadership? Could they move it on fast track? What are the politics that would move it quickly? Jen, I don't know if you want to start with that one.
I don't believe that the representative who is the sponsor is in the leadership team, but he's somebody who is very prominent in the Illinois legislature. He is somebody that is very often the top voice for Illinois trades labor, which is extremely influential in the state, and tends to represent their point of view. And so I do think that he is a powerful and influential legislator that cannot be taken for granted and may be able to get his request through despite opposition from other members of leadership that we've spoken to.
Are there any other questions? I don't see any additional hands raised or items in the Q&A. We'll give a quick second if anybody has any. Oh, there we go. Bob, I will, let's see. Once again, Bob Okan. Bob, you should be able to speak.
Okay, so who is the sponsor, the name?
Sure, it's Representative Larry Walsh, Jr.
Okay.
And I see another question from Jordan Woolman. Let's see, Jordan, you should be able to speak.
Yeah, thanks. Just going back to the timing of the bill. So do you have an expected date on the House? In the House?
So just in terms of the process, it is on third reading. It needs to move before March 31st. It could come up, right now they're in caucus. It could come up as the first bill that they call at noon today. So it could come up at any time now. It is ready to be called for a vote. We have been working the roll call very heavily and asking constituents asking local folks to contact with their opposition, but it could come up literally, like I said, I think they're still in caucus, but it could literally come up in 10 minutes from now.
And you're
Right.
not sure exactly how that vote will pan out, it sounds like.
No, we are definitely unsure. I know that in the House Environment Committee, there were, the vote ended up being 16-12. I think you need 16 votes to get it out as a majority. So that was the minimum needed. And I believe that means that all 10 Republicans and 6 of 19 Democrats ended up voting for it in the committee. And, there were some, I think some of them may have voted just to get it out. There wasn't a whole lot of discussion, but it was a roll call we worked and weren't successful on, and we are working the House roll call. It really could pass the House. It'll be easier to pass the Senate, although one of the items in the Senate is that the senator who represents the area, who is the senator that is, the Senate districts in Illinois have 2 rep districts. This representative senator opposes this bill and opposes this facility going in her district. So it'll create some interesting dynamics when it heads over to the Senate. And the senator whose district it goes in does not want it.
Got it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Sorry. Oh, it looks like Bob has one more question. Bob, you should be able to speak.
Is that Senator Rachel Ventura?
Yes, it is. And she introduced a bill to repeal this project entirely, which was not assigned to committee. So.
Okay. Okay. Bob, sorry, I'll put you back on. I don't know if that's an old hand raise or if you had an additional question. No. Okay. Looks like there was not another question from Bob. Sorry. Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat. I will drop my email in the chat well, in case there are additional follow-up questions for Jen Walling, the Illinois Environmental Council, Dr. Anya Brandon at the Ocean Conservancy, and Andrea Densham representing the Alliance for the Great Lakes. And I'm happy to get you in touch with any of those folks if you should have any follow-up questions. Let's see, Anya, Andrea, and Jen, any additional final comments you want to leave? No? Okay. Well, I think that wraps it up today. Thank you everyone for participating, and have a great afternoon. Bye.
Thank you all.